The council chamber was silent when Kate entered. She walked slowly, still recovering from injuries sustained in the battle. Her left arm was in a medical support brace. A scar ran along her cheek where flying debris had cut her. She wore her diplomatic uniform, but it felt wrong now. She was no longer just a diplomat. She was a witness to what her species truly was. The 12 representatives sat in their elevated seats looking down at her. Speaker Velrix's crystal body was dark purple, the color she now recognized as deep fear. Other members displayed their own emotional responses. The Zerathian delegate had retreated partially into its protective shell. The Talvexian representative leaned forward with obvious fascination. Archivist Zhen was present too, standing off to the side with a data display. He looked different now. His bioluminescent spots pulsed rapidly, indicating excitement or agitation. Kate realized he had been researching. While the battle raged, Zhen had been digging deeper into the archives, looking for answers to questions that suddenly seemed much more urgent. Speaker Velrix spoke first. His voice was careful, measured. He acknowledged humanity's victory. 20,000 humans had died, but they had stopped an enemy that had destroyed entire civilizations. The council was grateful. The galaxy was saved, but gratitude did not erase fear. If anything, the battle had made things worse. The council had watched the entire conflict. They had analyzed human tactics, recorded communications, studied the behavior of individual soldiers. What they saw confirmed their worst suspicions. Humans were not just capable of violence, they seemed to thrive on it. They fought with enthusiasm. They made jokes while dying. They celebrated destruction. The Zerathian delegate spoke next, demanding that humanity be quarantined immediately. The test had proven that humans were dangerous. Yes, they had won, but their methods were barbaric. They used tactics that violated every civilized norm. They sacrificed their own people without hesitation. They treated war like sport. Such beings could not be trusted. Kate wanted to defend her people, but she had no words. Everything the Zerathian said was true. She had watched humans laugh as they died. She had heard the war cries and battle songs. She had seen the joy on Ryan's face when he ordered the final assault. Humans were violent. That was not propaganda or misunderstanding. It was fact. Then Zhen stepped forward. He asked permission to share his findings. Velrix granted it. The mycelian activated his display, filling the chamber with images from the archives. These were older records, ones that had been hidden or forgotten. Documents that explained the mystery of Earth's ancient inhabitants. The beings called the Terrors did not vanish, Zhen explained. They evolved. Over millions of years, they changed. Their bodies became less specialized for pure combat. Their brains grew larger. Their social structures became more complex. But the core remained. The capacity for violence, the love of battle, the willingness to die fighting. Those traits were preserved and coded in their genetics. Zhen showed comparative DNA analyses. Human genetic code contained markers that matched samples taken from ancient Terror remains. The connection was undeniable. Humans were not descendants of the Terrors. They were the Terrors, transformed by evolution into something superficially different but fundamentally the same. The revelation sent shockwaves through the council. Several delegates stood demanding to speak. Others withdrew, unwilling to participate in a discussion that now felt dangerous. Kate felt numb. She had suspected this truth, but hearing it confirmed was different. Her species, her people, were the monsters from ancient legends. Every fear was justified, but Zhen was not finished. He showed more records, these ones recent. Reports from the battle against the Scourge, analysis of human behavior, and something unexpected, evidence that humans were different from the ancient Terrors in crucial ways. They had empathy. They formed bonds across genetic lines. They created art and music not about war, but about love, loss, hope, and beauty. The ancient Terrors fought because that was all they knew. Humans fought because they chose to. That distinction mattered. It meant humans could also choose not to fight. They could control their violent impulses, direct them toward specific purposes, turn them off when necessary. They were not slaves to their nature. They were masters of it. Kate found her voice. She stood before the council and spoke about humanity's journey. She talked about the wars humans fought against themselves, the terrible lessons they learned, the slow, painful process of building peace. She admitted that humans were violent, but she insisted they were also capable of incredible compassion. She pointed out that humans died protecting alien worlds, They sacrificed themselves for species they had just met. They fought the scourge not because Earth was threatened, but because other planets were in danger. That was not the behavior of mindless monsters. That was the behavior of beings who understood duty, honor, and justice. The Talvexian representative agreed with Kate. He reminded the council that every species had darkness in their history. The Talvexians themselves had nearly destroyed their homeworld in nuclear war before achieving peace. The Corvathians had practiced ritual cannibalism for thousands of years. Every civilization carried scars from its past. Humans were no different, but the Corvathian elder raised a concern. Those other species had overcome their darkness. Humans had not. They still maintained massive militaries. They still developed new weapons. They had achieved peace through deterrence, not through genuine change. Their violence was controlled, not eliminated. The capacity remained, waiting for an excuse to emerge. Kate could not argue against that. It was true. Humans had not transcended violence. They had simply learned to manage it. But was that not enough? Did they need to become completely peaceful to deserve acceptance? Or could the galaxy benefit from having warriors who understood restraint? The debate continued for hours. Arguments were made, countered, refined. Facts were presented, analyzed, disputed. Kate stood through it all, her injured arm aching, her body exhausted. But she refused to sit. This was too important. Her species' future hung in the balance. Finally, Speaker Velrix called for order. He had heard enough. The council would vote on humanity's membership. But first, he wanted to make something clear. The vote was not about whether humans were violent. That was established fact. The vote was about whether that violence could coexist with civilized society. Velrix looked directly at Kate. His crystal body shifted colors, moving from purple to a softer blue. He asked her a question. Could humanity promise to use their power responsibly? Could they guarantee they would not become the threat the ancient terrors represented? Could they live in peace with species weaker than themselves? Kate thought carefully before answering. She could make easy promises, tell comforting lies, but this moment demanded truth. So she spoke honestly. She could not guarantee anything. Humans were flawed, capable of terrible things, but they were also capable of greatness. They had proven they could change, grow, learn. Given the chance, they would prove themselves worthy of trust. She added one more thing. The galaxy now knew what humans were. They could choose to embrace that or reject it. But the choice should be based on who humans were now, not who their ancestors were millions of years ago. Judge them by their actions, not their genetics. Give them the same chance every other species received. Velrix nodded slowly. He ordered the council to prepare for the vote. Kate was escorted from the chamber. She stood outside, waiting with Alan, who had been watching from a separate gallery. He looked shaken. He had heard everything, learned the truth about human origins. His scientific understanding of evolution had been turned into a horror story. They waited for hours. No word came from inside. The vote was taking time, which meant it was close. A unanimous decision would have been quick. Division meant debate, negotiation, compromise. Kate tried to stay hopeful, but fear gnawed at her. What if the council rejected humanity? What would Earth do? Accept isolation? Or prove the council right by responding with force? Finally, the doors opened. An assistant summoned Kate back inside. The vote was complete. The decision had been made. Kate entered the chamber one more time, her heart pounding. She looked at the council members, trying to read their expressions. But alien faces were hard to interpret. She had no idea what was coming. Speaker Velrix stood. His crystal body glowed with colors Kate had never seen before. He spoke slowly, ensuring every word was translated perfectly. The council had voted to grant humanity membership. But the decision came with conditions. Strict ones. Humanity would join the galactic community, but they would do so under observation. They would serve as protectors, but they would be watched carefully. One mistake, one violation, and everything would end. Kate felt relief and anxiety in equal measure. They had won. Humanity would join the council. But the victory was conditional, fragile. The galaxy's trust had to be earned, maintained, protected. One wrong move and Earth's children would become outcasts forever. The responsibility was crushing. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to prove that even monsters could choose to be heroes. Jake Morrison stood on the deck of the UN Valiant and watched the stars. He had seen many things in his 20 years of military service, but this was different. Today, humanity would meet the galaxy. Today, Earth would join the Galactic Federation. The journey to Nexus Prime took 3 weeks. Jake spent most of that time with Captain Lily Brooks going over the mission details. They were part of Earth's first official delegation to the Federation. Ambassador Peter Grant led the group. He was excited and hopeful. He believed this was the start of a bright future for humanity. Jake was not so sure. He was a soldier. Soldiers learned to be careful. The Federation seemed friendly, but Jake had learned never to trust first impressions. Still, his orders were clear. Show the Federation what human military training looked like. Make them understand that Earth was serious about security. When they arrived at Nexus Prime, Jake could not believe his eyes. The planet was beautiful. Massive cities stretched across continents. Ships filled the sky, moving in perfect patterns. Everything was clean and organized. It looked like paradise. The Federation greeting party met them at the orbital station. There were beings of all shapes and sizes. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Others floated or crawled. All of them smiled and welcomed the human delegation with open arms. One alien approached Jake directly. She was tall and thin with blue skin and large eyes. Her name was Zelnara. She explained that she was a scientist who studied different cultures. The Federation had assigned her to learn about humans. Over the next few days, Zelnara followed Jake everywhere. She asked endless questions. What did humans eat? How did they raise children? What made them happy or sad? Jake answered patiently, but he noticed something strange. Zelnara treated humans like children. She spoke slowly and smiled too much. It was the way adults talked to kids who did not know better. On the 5th day, Zelnara made a request. She wanted to see human military training. Ambassador Grant loved the idea. He thought it would show the Federation that humans were disciplined and organized. Captain Brooks was less enthusiastic, but she agreed to arrange a demonstration. Jake prepared carefully. He set up live fire drills in the Valiant's training bay. He organized close combat demonstrations. He created tactical scenarios that showed how human soldiers worked together under pressure. Everything was designed to show the Federation that humans took defense seriously. The day of the demonstration arrived. Zelnara brought 20 other Federation observers. They filled the viewing gallery above the training bay. Jake began with basic weapons training. Human soldiers moved through shooting courses, hitting targets with precision. The observers watched with interest. Then Jake moved to tactical exercises. He showed how human squads cleared buildings, how they provided covering fire, how they coordinated attacks and retreats. The soldiers performed perfectly. Every movement was sharp and professional. Jake waited for questions. He expected the observers to ask about strategy or equipment. Instead, they clapped. They actually clapped and smiled like they had just watched an entertainment show. Zelnara approached Jake with that same patient smile. She said the demonstration was fascinating. She said humans were very creative with their recreational activities. She called it a wonderful cultural tradition. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Recreational activities. Cultural tradition. Did she think this was a game? He tried to explain. These were not games. These were combat skills. Skills that soldiers needed to survive in war. Skills that protected their homes and families. Zelnara nodded politely. She said that many species had similar historical reenactments. The Federation itself had martial traditions from thousands of years ago, before they learned to solve problems peacefully. She said it was charming that humans still maintained these traditions. Jake tried again. He explained asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, defensive strategies for outnumbered forces. He talked about the terrible choices soldiers sometimes had to make to protect civilians. The observers listened politely. Some took notes, but Jake could see it in their eyes. They thought he was describing elaborate games. Complex sports with interesting rules. They did not understand that he was talking about life and death. That evening, Jake met with Captain Brooks in her quarters. She poured them both drinks and sat down heavily. Brooks spoke first. She said the Federation was impressive. Their technology was advanced. Their society was peaceful. But something worried her. They had no real military. Their security forces were basically police officers with fancy uniforms. They had ships with weapons, but the crews did not know how to use them in actual combat. Jake agreed. He said it was like they had forgotten what war actually meant. The Federation had been at peace for so long that they could not imagine real violence anymore. To them, military training was just a strange human hobby. Brooks asked what would happen if someone attacked the Federation. Someone who had not forgotten how to fight. Someone who saw their peace as weakness instead of strength. Jake did not have a good answer. He just knew that if that day came, the Federation would not be ready. And humanity, as the newest and smallest member, would not be able to save them alone. Over the following weeks, the human delegation settled into life on Nexus Prime. Ambassador Grant attended diplomatic meetings. Captain Brooks coordinated with Federation fleet commanders. Jake continued his cultural exchange with Selnara. He learned that the Federation was truly ancient. 17 different civilizations working together. They had solved poverty, disease, and war itself. They had not fought a real conflict in 10,000 years. Their ships existed mainly for exploration and trade. Their security forces mainly directed traffic and helped with emergencies. Jake also learned that the Federation thought humans were primitive, but harmless. They saw Earth's military as an unfortunate holdover from humanity's violent past. They expected humans to outgrow it eventually, once they learned the Federation's peaceful ways. One night, Jake could not sleep. He walked the corridors of the diplomatic compound. Through a window, he saw Nexus Prime's capital city. Millions of lights sparkled in the darkness. Millions of people living in peace and safety. They had no idea how fragile that peace might be. He thought about Earth. Humanity had never known 10,000 years of peace. Humans had fought wars for territory, resources, and ideas. They had learned hard lessons about the cost of being unprepared. They had learned that peace was not the absence of conflict. Peace was something you had to protect. Jake wondered if the Federation would ever understand that lesson. He hoped they never had to, but deep in his soldier's heart he feared they would. And soon. The attack came without warning. 15 Federation worlds simultaneously reported enemy ships appearing in their skies. Within minutes, orbital stations exploded. Communication networks went dark. Defense satellites that had never fired a shot in 10,000 years were destroyed before their crews even understood what was happening. The Void Collective had planned perfectly. Their invasion fleet hit the Federation's most important worlds at the same time. They used overwhelming force against targets that could not fight back. Federation security forces tried to respond, but they had no idea how to fight a real war. On Nexus Prime, Jake Morrison was teaching a tactics class when the alarm sounded. He looked up at the ceiling speakers, recognizing the pattern immediately. That was not a drill. That was a real emergency alert. His students looked confused. One of them asked if this was part of the exercise. Jake's stomach dropped. They still thought everything was a game. Even with sirens blaring and emergency lights flashing, they could not comprehend actual danger. Jake grabbed his communication device and called Captain Brooks on the Valiant. Her face appeared on the screen. She looked grim. Enemy ships had appeared in orbit. Dozens of them. They were attacking the orbital defense platforms. Brooks was preparing the Valiant for combat. Jake told his students to evacuate to the shelters. They moved slowly, still uncertain. He wanted to scream at them to run, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would not help anyone now. Selnara appeared in the doorway. Her normally calm face showed pure fear. She asked Jake what was happening. Why were ships attacking? Why would anyone attack the Federation? Jake did not have time to explain. He ordered her to help evacuate civilians. Then he ran toward the military command center. Ambassador Grant would be there. So would the Federation Council. They would need guidance. They would need someone who understood warfare. The command center was chaos. Federation officials stood around screens showing destruction across multiple worlds. Some were crying. Others stood frozen in shock. No one seemed to know what to do. Ambassador Grant saw Jake and rushed over. He asked desperately for advice. How could this be happening? The Federation had tried to open diplomatic channels. The attackers had destroyed the diplomatic ships without even listening. Jake looked at the tactical displays. The enemy was using standard invasion doctrine. Hit hard and fast. Overwhelm defenses before they could organize. Take control of key infrastructure. It was efficient and brutal. A Federation admiral asked Jake what they should do. Jake felt the weight of billions of lives pressing down on him. He said they needed to evacuate civilians from the capital. They needed to fortify defensible positions. They needed to organize every available force for a counterattack. The Admiral looked lost. He asked Jake to take command. The Federation Council agreed immediately. They authorized Jake Morrison to direct the defense of Nexus Prime, a human officer who had been part of the Federation for less than a year now commanded their most important military operation in 10,000 years. Jake accepted without hesitation. He started giving orders. Every human soldier on the planet was to report for duty immediately. Federation security forces would be organized into defensive units. Civilians would evacuate to underground shelters. Critical infrastructure would be prepared for demolition if necessary. In orbit, Captain Brooks faced impossible odds. The Valiant and 3 other human ships were all that stood between the enemy fleet and Nexus Prime. Brooks knew they could not win a straight fight. So she did not fight straight. She used hit-and-run tactics. The Valiant would appear, fire missiles, and disappear behind the planet before the enemy could respond. She coordinated with the other human ships to attack from multiple directions. The enemy had more ships and better weapons, but they had never faced opponents who fought like this. Lieutenant Sophie Turner led a squadron of human fighters in a desperate attack on an enemy command ship. Her pilots flew through weapons fire that should have killed them all. 3 fighters were destroyed. Turner's own ship took heavy damage, but they got through. Their missiles struck the command ship's bridge. The ship spun out of control and crashed into 2 of its own vessels. The Void Collective Fleet commander watched in confusion. These humans were supposed to be insignificant. Their military training was supposed to be ceremonial games, but they fought with skill and courage that his own veterans struggled to match. Still, the collective had overwhelming numbers. More ships arrived every hour. The human vessels were taking damage. Eventually, they would be destroyed. It was only a matter of time. On the ground, Jake transformed Nexus Prime's capital into a fortress. Sergeant Amy Chen set demolition charges on bridges and tunnels. Federation security officers finally understood that their training had been real preparation. They followed human instructions exactly, setting up defensive positions and supply depots. Xelnara watched Jake work. She saw him mark firing positions on maps. She saw him calculate angles and ranges. She saw him organize civilians and soldiers with calm efficiency. Everything he had shown her in training sessions was now being used for its actual purpose: defense, protection, war. She approached him during a brief pause. She said she finally understood. Humans had not been playing. They had been teaching. Everything they showed the Federation was real military doctrine. But the Federation had been too naive to recognize it. Jake said the Federation had been lucky. Lucky that humans joined before this happened. Lucky that Earth still remembered how to fight. He did not say what he was thinking. That they might all die anyway. That 4 human ships and a few thousand soldiers might not be enough. The first enemy ground troops landed 3 days after the initial attack. They expected easy victory. Instead, they found prepared defenses, hidden gun positions, demolition traps, coordinated resistance. The first wave of enemy soldiers pushed into the capital district. They advanced confidently down wide streets. Then the ambush hit. Human and Federation forces opened fire from elevated positions. Chen detonated charges that collapsed buildings blocking retreat routes. The enemy lost 200 soldiers in 15 minutes. The enemy adapted quickly. They sent heavier forces. They used artillery. They advanced more carefully. The defenders fought for every street and every building. Blood stained the beautiful capital city. Smoke rose from burning structures. Ambassador Grant watched from the command center. He saw the city he had admired being destroyed. He saw brave soldiers dying to protect civilians. He turned to Jake and apologized. He had been wrong. Peace required more than good intentions. It required the strength to defend what you valued. Jake told Grant to save the apologies for after they won. Right now they needed to focus on survival. In orbit, Captain Brooks received emergency communication from Earth. The entire United Earth Navy was on its way. Every ship, every soldier. Humanity was coming to help the Federation, but they were weeks away. The defenders of Nexus Prime just had to hold out until reinforcements arrived. Brooks looked at her damage reports. The Valiant could not last weeks. It probably could not last days. But she would fight until her ship broke apart or the enemy retreated. Those were the only two options. The Federation had learned a terrible lesson. Peace was precious, but peace built on ignorance was fragile. The galaxy was not a safe place. It was a dangerous place where the unprepared died and the strong survived. Humanity had tried to teach them that lesson gently. The Void Collective was teaching them the same lesson with fire and blood. The siege of Nexus Prime entered its second week. The capital was now a battlefield. Beautiful parks had become defensive positions. Elegant buildings were fortified strong points. The Federation learned what humans had always known. Cities could be transformed into weapons. Jake Morrison coordinated the defense from an underground command center. He had not slept properly in days. His uniform was dirty and torn, but his mind remained sharp. Every decision mattered. Every order could mean life or death for thousands. A Federation officer named Felmora had become Jake's second in command. She learned quickly. She understood tactics now. She understood why soldiers sacrificed themselves to hold positions. She understood that war was not a game you could quit when you got tired. The Void Collective had expected easy victory. Instead, they found themselves fighting for every street. Their soldiers were trained and experienced, but they had never faced defensive tactics like this. Human military doctrine turned cities into deadly traps. Corporal Danny Wright led a mixed squad of human Marines and Federation security officers. They held a transportation hub that controlled access to 3 major districts. The Collective attacked that hub again and again. Wright's squad fought them off each time. During one attack, Wright's squad ran out of ammunition. The enemy pushed forward, thinking victory was certain. But Wright had learned from Sergeant Chen. He had prepared backup plans. He detonated charges that collapsed the hub's upper levels. 200 enemy soldiers died in the collapse. The squad held their position. When relief forces finally arrived, Wright had sustained injuries but refused medical evacuation. He said his squad needed him. Felmora watched this young human refuse to leave his post despite being wounded. She finally understood what humans meant by duty. In orbit, Captain Brooks fought her own desperate battle. The Valiant had taken terrible damage. Hull breaches were sealed with emergency patches. Life support was failing in 3 sections. Half her weapons were offline. But Brooks kept fighting. She coordinated with Commander Greg Walsh on the UEN Defiant and Lieutenant Turner's fighter squadrons. They used every trick in human military history. They hid behind debris fields. They used false signals to confuse enemy sensors. They made the enemy waste ammunition on decoys. The Collective Fleet Commander grew frustrated. His forces outnumbered the humans 10-1. But the humans refused to fight the way he expected. They hit and ran. They ambushed. They sacrificed damaged ships in ramming attacks. They fought with a desperation and creativity that confused his tactical computers. Then Admiral Helen Price arrived with Earth's main fleet. 200 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. The Collective forces finally faced real opposition. The tide of battle began to turn. Price was a veteran of 30 years. She had fought pirates and rebels. She had commanded fleets in training exercises that simulated every possible scenario. Now she faced her first real war. She was ready. Price's strategy was simple. Draw the enemy fleet away from Nexus Prime. Force them to fight in open space where human tactical superiority mattered more. Make them choose between holding the planet or defending their own ships. The Void Collective took the bait. They could not let Earth's fleet attack their supply lines. They pulled forces from the siege to intercept Price's ships. The pressure on Nexus Prime eased slightly, just enough for the defenders to breathe. Jake used that breathing room to reorganize his defenses. He pulled damaged units back for rest. He rotated fresh troops to the front lines. He consolidated supply depots and established new defensive positions. Sergeant Chen approached Jake with a proposal. She wanted to take a small team into enemy-held territory. She would sabotage the Collective's ground command center. It was dangerous. The team might not survive, but it could cripple the enemy's ability to coordinate attacks. Jake approved the mission. Chen selected 5 volunteers, 3 humans and 2 Federation officers. They moved through ruined buildings under cover of darkness. They avoided enemy patrols. They reached the command center and planted explosives in critical systems. The team tried to escape before the charges detonated. They almost made it. Enemy soldiers spotted them 2 blocks from friendly lines. A firefight erupted. Chen and her team fought desperately. 2 Federation officers died covering the retreat. Chen took a shot to the shoulder but kept running. The charges exploded just as Chen's team reached safety. The enemy command center collapsed in flames. Collective forces on the ground lost coordination. Their attacks became disorganized. Jake's defenders pushed back, reclaiming 2 districts. In space, Admiral Price executed her masterstroke. She had positioned her fleet to look vulnerable. The collective commander saw an opportunity to destroy Earth's forces in one decisive battle. He committed his reserves. His entire fleet moved to attack Price's position. Then Price sprang her trap. She had hidden a quarter of her fleet behind a moon. Those ships appeared behind the collective fleet. The enemy found themselves caught between 2 human formations. Price's forces opened fire with everything they had. Captain Brooks led the damaged human ships from Nexus Prime orbit in a final attack. The Valiant could barely maneuver. Its weapons were held together with emergency repairs. But Brooks pushed her ship forward anyway. Lieutenant Turner's remaining fighters provided cover. The space battle became the largest naval engagement in galactic history. Thousands of ships fought in brutal close-quarters combat. The collective had numbers. Humans had tactics and determination. Ships on both sides burned and died. The collective fleet commander realized too late that he had made a terrible mistake. These humans were not playing war games. They were experts at war itself. Every battle tactic humanity had developed over thousands of years of conflict was being used against him. His flagship took multiple hits. Systems failed. Fires spread through the ship. He ordered retreat, but human forces had positioned themselves to cut off escape routes. His fleet was trapped. On the ground, Jake received reports of enemy forces withdrawing. The collective's ground troops were pulling back to their landing sites. Without naval support, they could not hold Nexus Prime. The siege was breaking. Jake did not celebrate. Too many had died. The capital was in ruins, but they had survived. The Federation had survived, and they had learned Zelnara found Jake in the command center. She looked exhausted. She had spent the siege helping in medical shelters. She had seen the cost of war firsthand. She told Jake she was writing a new report about how the Federation had been wrong, about how humans had tried to teach them, about how they had not listened until it was almost too late. Jake said the Federation would need that report. Because this war had taught an important lesson. Peace was not free. It required vigilance. It required strength. It required the willingness to fight when fighting was necessary. Ambassador Grant approached them. His diplomatic robes were dirty. His face showed the strain of weeks under siege. He said he had been naive. He had believed good intentions were enough. But good intentions did not stop missiles or protect civilians. Jake told Grant not to lose his optimism. The galaxy needed people who believed in peace. But peace had to be defended. That was what humanity could teach the Federation. How to be peaceful and strong at the same time. The reports came in throughout the day. The Void Collective fleet was retreating. Their ground forces were evacuating. Nexus Prime was secure. The battle was won, but the war was not over. The Federation had been hurt badly. 15 worlds needed liberation. Billions of civilians needed rescue. The collective had to be driven completely from Federation space. And the Federation, with human help, would do exactly that. 3 months after the Battle of Nexus Prime, Jake Morrison walked through the rebuilt Council Plaza. Workers were repairing buildings. Engineers were restoring power systems. Life was slowly returning to normal. But nothing would ever be the same. The war had ended 2 weeks ago. Admiral Price's forces had driven the Void Collective completely from Federation space. The Collective's supreme commander had been captured. Their fleet was destroyed. Their invasion had failed completely, but the cost had been terrible. 15 Federation worlds had been occupied. Billions of civilians had died. Entire cities were ruins. The Federation's economy was shattered. Recovery would take decades. Jake had been promoted to general. The Federation Council had asked him to rebuild their military from nothing. It was a massive job. The Federation had 17 member species spread across hundreds of worlds. Creating a unified military force would require years of work. But Jake was not alone. Felmora was now a colonel. She commanded Federation ground forces and worked closely with human advisors. Captain Brooks, now Admiral Brooks, led the integrated space fleet. Federation and human crews served together on every ship. The cultural barriers that had existed before the war were gone. Humans and aliens had fought together, bled together, died together. That created bonds stronger than any diplomatic treaty. Jake entered the new Federation Defense Academy. The building had been constructed on the site where the worst fighting occurred. It was a deliberate choice. Future generations needed to remember what happened when civilizations forgot how to defend themselves. The Academy's first class was graduating today. 200 students from 12 different species. They had spent 6 months learning military tactics, strategy, and ethics. They understood now that military force was a tool. A dangerous tool that should be used carefully, but a necessary tool nonetheless. Selnara was giving the keynote speech. She stood at the podium and looked out at the graduating class. She had changed. The war had changed everyone. She was no longer the naive scientist who thought human military training was just cultural theater. Selnara spoke about her mistakes. She had dismissed human warnings. She had treated warfare as an academic curiosity. She had believed the Federation's peace was permanent and unbreakable. She had been wrong about everything. She explained that humans had tried to teach the Federation an important lesson. Peace required strength. Safety required vigilance. Freedom required the willingness to fight for it. The Federation had not listened, and they had almost paid the ultimate price. The graduates listened carefully. Many of them were war veterans. They had fought in the siege. They had seen friends die. They understood that this was not a game or academic exercise. This was about survival. After the ceremony, Jake met with Ambassador Grant. Grant looked older. The war had aged him, but he had not lost his hope for peace. He just understood now that peace had to be protected. Grant told Jake that the Federation Council was voting on major reforms. Every world would maintain defensive forces. Every citizen would receive basic military training. The Federation would never again be caught unprepared. Jake approved. But he warned Grant about going too far. The goal was to be ready for war, not to become a militaristic society. The Federation's peaceful values were worth preserving. They just needed to be combined with realistic defense planning. A message arrived for Jake. The Void Collective's commander was being brought to trial. The Federation wanted Jake to testify. They wanted him to explain how humanity had recognized the threat that the Federation missed. Jake attended the trial 2 days later. The collective commander, whose name was Zekthor, sat in a secure cell. He looked defeated. His invasion had failed. His fleet was destroyed. His civilization's reputation as unstoppable conquerors was shattered. Jake gave his testimony. He explained that humans had recognized the danger because humanity had never stopped studying warfare. Earth's history was full of conflicts. Humans understood that peace was not permanent, that threats could emerge at any time. That preparation was essential. The judges asked Jake why humans maintained such extensive military training if they wanted peace. Jake answered carefully. He said humans maintained military strength to prevent wars, not to start them. History had taught humanity that weakness invited aggression. Strength encouraged respect and negotiation. Then Zekthor spoke. He said the collective had studied the Federation for months before attacking. They saw wealthy worlds with no defenses. They saw security forces that were basically ceremonial. They saw a civilization that had forgotten how to fight. Zekthor admitted he had observed human military training. He saw humans teaching combat tactics to Federation personnel, but he also saw the Federation treating those lessons as entertainment, as games. So the collective concluded that humans were no threat. That had been a fatal mistake. Humans were not playing. They were preparing. When war came, they knew exactly what to do. And they taught the Federation how to fight back. Jake left the trial feeling grim. The war was over. The Federation had survived. But millions had died because the Federation did not take defense seriously. That was a heavy price for learning a lesson. 5 years passed. The Federation transformed completely. Military academies existed on every major world. Every citizen received defensive training. The combined Federation fleet was the most powerful force in known space. But the Federation had not become warlike. Trade and diplomacy remained their primary tools. They extended friendship to new civilizations. They helped developing worlds. They promoted peace and cooperation. The difference was that now the Federation could defend what it valued. Peace backed by strength was more stable than peace built on ignorance. Jake visited Earth one final time before returning to his permanent assignment at Federation headquarters. He walked through the city where he grew up. He visited his family. He remembered why he had spent his life in military service. He wanted to protect people. All people, human and alien alike. The Federation had given humanity a chance to do that on a galactic scale. The war had been terrible, but it had also shown that cooperation between species was possible. Essential, even. Before leaving Earth, Jake received a message from Zelnara. She was teaching a new generation of students at the Defense Academy. They wanted to understand why humans never stopped preparing for war. Would Jake speak to them? Jake agreed. He traveled back to Nexus Prime and stood before a classroom of young Federation officers. They looked at him with respect and curiosity. They knew his history. They knew he had helped save the Federation. One student asked the question Jake had been expecting. Why did humans maintain military training even during peacetime? Why did they never forget how to fight? Jake thought carefully before answering. He explained that humans came from a difficult world. Earth had predators and natural disasters. Resources were limited. Early humans learned that survival required cooperation, but also the ability to defend what cooperation built. Throughout human history, civilizations that forgot how to defend themselves were conquered by those who remembered. So humanity learned to hope for peace but prepare for war. That was not because humans were violent. It was because humans understood reality. Another student asked if that meant peaceful civilizations were weak. Jake shook his head firmly. Peace was not weakness. The Federation's values were admirable. Compassion, cooperation, and diplomacy were strengths, not weaknesses. The mistake was thinking that peaceful values eliminated the need for defense. Good intentions did not stop predators. The Federation had learned that lesson the hard way. Class ended. The students filed out to their next session. Tactical combat simulations. They treated it seriously now. Not as games, but as essential skills. Skills that might one day save lives. Jake watched them go. He thought about all those who had died teaching the Federation this lesson. The human soldiers, the Federation officers, the civilians caught in the crossfire. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. The Federation would remember. Zelnara approached Jake after the class. She thanked him for speaking. She said the new generation understood what her generation had not. That peace required eternal vigilance. Jake smiled sadly. He said he hoped this generation never had to face what the last generation faced, but if they did, they would be ready. The Federation would never again mistake preparation for play. They would never again confuse strength with aggression, because somewhere in the galaxy there were always predators, and the Federation, thanks to humanity, was no longer prey.